morning into the afternoon, there were some discussions back and forth between the Crown and I on conditions for Randy Hillier's release. I went over the majority of them with Randy, and he was fine with them. And now what normally happens is it's either sort of a take it or leave it type situation. Either the person has to agree to all the conditions as finally negotiated, or otherwise have a bail hearing where everything is at issue. In this particular case, there was one half of one of the conditions that we could not agree to. And so I got the Crown to agree that we could put that in front of the court and have a hearing on that narrow issue only. And so the issue was whether or not Randy Hillier would be prevented from, on social media or through his supportive organizations, be able to comment on or support anti-mask mandates and anti-vaccine mandate organizations or causes. My argument was that none of those subjects had anything to do with the allegations that were before the court, and therefore should not have formed part of his bail hearing. Unfortunately, the Justice of the Peace disagreed and sided with the Crown on that. But because Randy did not agree to that condition, it remains an option available to us to appeal through the bail review process to go to a higher court and challenge that decision and essentially appeal the finding.
Right. So the other typical conditions, my guess is you were able to negotiate things like, for example, sometimes it's called a surety or right, a certain amount of dough, or don't leave the country. Are those conditions publicly known? Are you able to discuss those?
Yeah. I mean, there's some standard, very simple conditions: reside at a specific address and notify the police if there's going to be a change of address. Again, there was never any concern about Randy not coming to court. The concerns were on the so-called second and tertiary grounds, dealing with the possibility of further reoffense and also the reputation of the justice system if somebody is released. And so, there were conditions that he can't have contact with people who were organizers of the Freedom Convoy, for example. And that's a fairly ordinary type of condition, that when you have a number of people who are charged in relation to the same organization or the same incident, there are normally conditions that the different people can't communicate with one another.
Now, were those organizers, were they named a particular list of people?
They were, and I mean, some of the names were names that have become household names that we recognize: Tamara Leach, Chris Barber, Pat King. But there are also other names, some of which Randy or I recognize, other ones that weren't quite clear to us who they were, but it could just simply be other individuals who are either facing charges due to their involvement in the Freedom Convoy, or maybe they're persons of interest that are currently being investigated by the police.
Now, I want to get back to the political speech ban, which concerns me greatly, because, right, I mean, I think, frankly, some of the charges that Randy's facing are laughable. I mean, assault on an officer. The fact that Randy didn't even know what that was, didn't even know what they were talking about. And by the way, I just want to tell our viewers, I understand why you're here instead of Randy. Randy's a chatty fella, loves to talk. We love talking with him. But of course, given that there's a restraining order on what he can say, we don't want to get him in trouble. And you can speak for him.
Right.
I think these are trumped up. I think this is political in nature. I think Randy, I'm actually surprised he wasn't jailed, the same way Tamara Leach and some of the other characters you've mentioned were jailed. So I think congratulations go to you in large part for negotiating with the prosecutor. But I want to get to the wording. So Randy Hillier is not allowed to criticize mask mandates or vaccine mandates, or to talk about those issues on social media. Is that the wording, or like, for example, can he talk? He's a member of the legislature of Ontario. Can he talk about them there? Can he, if a reporter for the Toronto Star asks him a question about vaccine mandates, is Randy Hillier allowed to talk to him?
Well, that was one of the arguments made by the Crown, which I thought was somewhat of an unpersuasive argument. But the Justice of the Peace seemed to cue in on that, saying that he's not prevented from speaking about these matters. He's prevented from speaking of those matters on social media. But let me help you understand something, because a lot of people actually, I did get some criticism for this, saying that we had actually agreed to the social media ban on on referring to the Freedom Convoy and also being able to support the so-called Freedom Convoy or any organization that bears that name. And that is not an unusual bail condition, because whenever the allegation is that somebody was involved with some group or organization that is the basis for the alleged crimes, and I'm not saying he's guilty of those crimes. In fact, I'm saying he's not guilty of those crimes. But where there are charges before the court and the theory of the prosecution is that there was a group of people or an organization or a place or an incident, it's quite common to separate the accused person from that organization, place, group of people, etc. So that wasn't unusual. But where it got weird, in my view, was including also a prohibition against speaking about vaccine mandates or mask mandates on social media, or supporting a group or organization that is against vaccine mandates or mask mandates. And that, in my view, had no connection to the offenses whatsoever and should not have been part of his bail. I mean, again, it doesn't come as a surprise that I made this argument, and I don't believe that the court got it right. Again, I won't say too much on that. I mean, the court can't defend itself or respond to these criticisms, but I'll just say that we are considering an appeal of that decision.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the thing. It's one thing to say, okay, he's charged, so stay away from them. That sounds plausible to me, but you cannot criticize masks. I mean, as if that in itself is enough to send someone to jail. That's deeply troubling that the prosecutor would demand it and that a judge would uphold it. And I certainly hope you do appeal that.
That's an excerpt from my daily show, the Ezra Levant Show. Every day I do a monologue on the news of the day, then I interview an interesting guest, and then I read my hate mail. You gotta subscribe. Go to rebelnews.com.